That morning, it felt as if the entire world had stopped breathing. It wasn't just the chill of winter, the cold of fear, of something about to shatter. Jonathan Sinclair stepped out of his car, his breath white in the faint mist. He had just returned from a 3-day business trip in California. Only one thought filled his mind: to hold his little daughter Emma in his arms again. But when he looked up, Jonathan froze. On the marble steps of his vast frost-covered mansion, Emma, his 8-year-old girl, was curled up, her lips purple, her tiny hands stiff from the cold. The blanket wrapped around her was torn and filthy. And what made Jonathan collapse to his knees was the boy holding her. A frail, dark-skinned boy, wearing nothing but thin, ragged clothes that couldn't withstand the winter wind, wrapped his arms tightly around Emma's small body, fighting to keep her last bit of warmth alive. Both of them were trembling violently. Jonathan dropped his leather briefcase onto the frozen ground. The sound cracked sharply through the silence. He stumbled toward the steps, slipping on the frost, shouting as he ran, "Emma! My God, Emma!" The boy lifted his head. His deep brown eyes opened, cloudy with exhaustion, yet within them still flickered a light, the light of courage no child should have to bear. His voice was hoarse, trembling. "She's safe now. I kept her warm. I kept her safe." Then he collapsed, his entire body going limp against the frozen marble. Jonathan fell to his knees, pulling his daughter into his arms. Emma was still breathing, faintly, but alive. Tears fell onto her hair as he looked at the boy lying motionless beside them. A boy with no home, no coat, not a single coin in his pocket. And yet, he had done something most of the rich never could. He gave his own warmth to save another's life. Jonathan whispered, voice trembling, "Who are you, son? Who are you to do something like this?" No answer came, only the wind howling through the trees, cold and hollow. In that moment the world stood still. A father, his little girl, and a nameless boy who had given everything to keep a stranger alive. Jonathan held his daughter tighter, his heart overwhelmed by 1,000 questions and emotions. And then, like a voice echoing softly through the silence, the narration began. That morning, when a billionaire found his daughter in the arms of a homeless boy, his world stopped. But to understand what led to that moment, we have to go back 24 hours, to where the story of a boy with nothing but a heart full of kindness began. 24 hours earlier, miles away from that luxurious mansion, in the cold and restless heart of New York City, a boy sat alone on a worn-out stone bench in front of the closed public library. His name was Elijah Carter, 13 years old. His hair was curly and unkempt, his thin jacket torn at the shoulder, and his eyes. Those eyes looked both young and ancient, as if they'd seen too much of life already. For 2 years, Elijah had lived on the streets. Ever since his mother died of cancer, he had run away from his first foster home, a place where children were beaten, starved, and forced to work like servants. Elijah had learned how to survive. He knew which trash bins still had food safe to eat, which parks were least likely to chase away the homeless, which corners were safest to sleep without being woken by sirens or angry shouts. Life taught him endurance. But his mother had taught him something more important: to stay kind. He still remembered her final words, whispered before she passed away. "Son, We may not have money, but we will always have a heart. Never let the world take that away from you. And Elijah never forgot. Even when hungry, he shared his last piece of bread with another homeless person. Even when exhausted, he helped an older woman push her cart up a snowy hill. Once he found a wallet in the park. Inside were several $100s, enough to live comfortably for weeks. But Elijah brought it to the nearest police station and said quietly, "I don't know whose it is, but I think they need it more than I do." The officer looked at the thin, ragged boy before him, and for a moment, neither could speak. That boy had nothing in his pockets, but he was richer than most, because he could give without hesitation. That night, a freezing wind swept through the city. The weather report warned, "Tonight will be the coldest of the year, temperatures dropping to 14 degrees Fahrenheit." Elijah pulled his collar tight and clutched the old tattered blanket he had found behind a dumpster. 3 weeks ago, he'd lost his sleeping bag, stolen by older kids while he slept in an alley. His stomach ached with hunger, his hands trembled, and his eyes stung from the cold wind. Elijah looked up at the gray sky and sighed. He murmured to himself, "Just a short rest. 5 minutes. Then I'll head to the shelter." But deep down he knew. 5 minutes of sleep in this cold could mean forever. He leaned his head against the wall, staring at the glowing windows in the distance. Homes where families were likely gathered around fireplaces, holding mugs of cocoa, laughing together. A different world, only a few blocks away, yet as far as another planet. He whispered, as if speaking to his mother, "I miss you, Mom. If you were here, you'd tell me to get up, to keep going." "I will, Mom. I promise." Taking a deep breath, Elijah stood and stuffed the torn blanket into his backpack. Far away he could see the road leading toward the wealthy suburbs, Greenwich, where everything seemed perfect. He thought maybe there would be a church or a shelter open there, and so Elijah began to walk, step by step, through silent streets, past rows of tall iron gates, past glowing windows of warm golden light that he could only admire from afar. His sneakers were worn through, his feet soaked in icy slush, but in his heart he still carried a small flame, the belief that every good thing he did would matter one day. He had no idea that that same kindness would be tested this night, and the choice he was about to make would change the lives of 2 people forever. That night, the snow fell thicker than the forecast had warned. White flakes swirled in the wind like tiny shards of glass, glimmering, yet sharp enough to sting the skin. Elijah had been walking for more than 2 hours across dozens of streets, his feet soaked and numb from the cold. He was about to turn left, toward an old church at the end of the road where kind strangers sometimes opened their doors for the homeless. But then he heard something, a sound, a cry, soft, trembling, broken. Elijah stopped, head lifting slightly. The sound came across the street from the row of grand mansions standing silently in the darkness. Iron gates towered high, the trees trimmed perfectly, golden light spilling faintly from within, as if from another world. The cry came again, weaker but unmistakable. "Somebody, please help me." Elijah's heart thudded as he stepped closer, cautious yet drawn by instinct. Through the thick veil of snow he saw her, behind a tall black iron gate nearly 10 feet high, a little girl curled up tightly on the marble steps. She wore pink pajamas and was barefoot, her blonde hair tangled and flecked with ice. She was crying, her hands wrapped around her knees, her whole body trembling. Elijah called out softly, "Hey, are you okay?" The girl startled, lifting her head. Her blue eyes were wet with tears, her lips quivering. I got locked out. The door won't open. I rang the bell, I knocked, but no one answered. It's been all night." Elijah glanced at the gate, then at the enormous house behind her, a few lights still glowing in distant windows. "Did you try knocking louder?" She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, I yelled too, but the house is so big. My dad's on a trip and the staff stay in another part of the house. No one can hear me. I'm scared." Elijah said nothing for a moment. The wind whistled through the trees, carrying the damp chill of snow. He could feel the cold sinking deep into his bones. It was close to midnight now. The temperature was dropping fast. He knew a child dressed like that wouldn't survive more than a few hours in the open air. He could walk away. No one would blame him. He was just a 13-year-old boy, tired, hungry, alone. He didn't know anyone, anything. But when he saw those small shoulders shaking in fear, Elijah remembered his mother. He remembered that winter night long ago when she had held him close and whispered, "Elijah, if you ever see someone as lonely as you, stay with them. Because sometimes just one person staying can make the world warmer." He took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the frozen gate. Then he called out, "Hold on, okay? Don't be scared. I'm coming over." The girl blinked in surprise. You're gonna do what?" Elijah stepped back, staring at the iron gate, nearly 3 meters tall, its tips sharp as knives. He swallowed hard. "I'm gonna climb it." His hands clenched into fists. The skin was cracked, bleeding. But he didn't hesitate. He gripped the frozen metal and began to pull himself up. The steel burned his fingers with cold, but he kept going. Each time he slipped, he tried again, until finally, he made it over. When he landed on the other side, his knees scraped and bleeding. He winced, but said nothing. He went straight to the little girl. "I'm Elijah. What's your name?" "Emma." "It's okay now, Emma. I'll help you." He pounded on the big wooden door, once, twice, 3 times. No response. He pressed the doorbell, held it down for 10 seconds, then 20. Still nothing. Emma sobbed softly. "I told you. No one can hear. My house is huge. No one knows I'm here." Elijah looked around. The snow was falling harder now. Each breath turned into white mist. There was nowhere else, no other choice. He removed his thin jacket, the only one he had, and wrapped it around her. Then he removed the torn blanket from his bag and covered them both. Emma looked at him, confused. "But you'll be cold." Elijah smiled faintly. "I'm used to it. You're not. Let me keep you warm, okay?" She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. He sat beside her, wrapping his arms around her small body. 2 children, one rich, one poor. One who had everything, one who had nothing. And yet that night, in the heart of the bitterest winter, somehow, between them, Two hearts began to glow warm. The snow fell heavier now, thick sheets descending from the sky like white curtains, swallowing everything beneath them. The wind howled so fiercely that every breath felt like a blade against the skin. Elijah and Emma sat together on the frozen marble steps before the silent mansion, a place that now looked less like a home and more like an icebound castle. The entire neighborhood lay still. No footsteps. No lights are moving. No one to know. No one to hear. Elijah pulled the torn blanket tighter, wrapping it as best he could around both of them. His only jacket, thin and frayed, now draped over Emma's small shoulders, reaching down to her knees. He had only a worn sweater left, his hands bruised and red, his lips trembling blue. Emma whispered weakly, You're shaking. You're so cold, aren't you?" Elijah forced a faint smile, his voice raspy. "I'm fine. I've been colder than this before." He was lying. He had never been this cold. His teeth clenched as he pulled Emma closer, shielding her with his body from the merciless wind. Their breaths turned into small white clouds, fading into one another. Two flickering candles fighting the storm. Time slowed, almost stopped. Elijah looked up toward the sky, where the city's lights reflected faintly off the falling snow, and for a moment, he thought of his mother. He remembered that final night in the hospital when she held his hand, eyes filled with tears. "My son, if one day you can do something good, no matter how small, do it. Because kindness, once given, always finds its way back." He smiled faintly. "I'm trying, Mom." Emma pressed closer, her voice tiny. "My mom, she said the same thing your mom did." Elijah turned to her. "She did?" "She died when I was 5. I miss her so much." Her voice trembled, eyes shining with tears. "My dad's always busy. I have toys, clothes, a big room, but no one to play with. Do you ever feel lonely?" Elijah laughed softly, though his lips were stiff from the cold. "Every day. But I've gotten used to it. When you get used to being lonely, the only thing left to do is make sure someone else doesn't feel that way." Emma stared at him, silent, wide-eyed. She didn't understand why she suddenly felt warm in 10 degrees below freezing. It wasn't the coat. It wasn't the blanket. It was the way he spoke. The way he stayed. The wind grew louder. Snow began to blanket their shoulders. Elijah's head grew heavy, his eyes stinging, his breath slowing. He knew these signs. Hypothermia was setting in. His body was shutting down. Emma saw him fading and panicked, shaking him. "Hey, open your eyes. You told me not to sleep. You can't sleep either." Elijah forced a weak smile, whispering, "I'm not sleeping. Just resting a little." "No, you have to stay awake. If you sleep, you won't wake up." She cried harder, her small hands gripping his shoulders. Elijah heard her through the haze, her voice echoing faintly as if from far away. He fought to stay conscious, to lift his heavy eyelids. He looked at her, smiled faintly. "I'm here, Emma. I'm not going anywhere." He trembled violently but kept speaking, brokenly. "Let's play a game, okay?" to stay awake. Tell me your happiest day. Emma sniffled. When Daddy took me to Disneyland, before Mommy died. I rode the roller coasters, ate cotton candy. Mommy laughed all day. Elijah nodded, his voice a whisper. Sounds wonderful. Then he told her about the only time he and his mom went to the beach, about the sand, the waves, and how his mother had smiled and said, "The ocean is as wide as your dreams, Elijah." They talked, they shared stories, they laughed, faint, fragile laughter, in the middle of a snowstorm. Two tiny stars flickering in a frozen sky. By around 2 in the morning, Elijah stopped shivering. That wasn't a good sign. When the body stops shaking, it means it's given up. Emma panicked, placing her hand on his cheek. "You're too cold. Please, open your eyes." Elijah murmured faintly. "Just tired." Emma clung to him, tears mixing with the falling snow. "Don't go. Please. I'll be scared without you." The boy's lips curved slightly, his voice barely a whisper, a promise carved into the cold. "I told you. I'm here. I won't leave you." And he kept his word. Elijah held Emma through the rest of the night, using the last of his breath, his warmth, his strength to keep her alive. He didn't sleep. He didn't give up, until the first light of dawn spilled over the world, painting the snow a faint blush of pink. When the sun rose, they were still there. Emma, lying still, wrapped in his jacket and the torn blanket. Elijah, slumped over, lips purple, his breath faint as mist. And in that quiet, half-lit moment, perhaps he heard his mother's voice again. "You did it, Elijah. You kept your heart warm, even when the world was cold." The first light of dawn crept across the pale gray sky of Greenwich. The sun hadn't yet warmed the ground. The snow still lay thick and silent, as if the whole world had frozen overnight. A black car rolled quietly to a stop before the tall iron gates. It belonged to Jonathan Sinclair, the man returning home earlier than planned after a 3-day business trip in California. He was tired but excited. Only one image filled his mind, Emma's smile when he opened the front door. He had no idea. He was about to see something that would change his life forever. As the automatic gates opened, the headlights swept across the snow-covered courtyard. And then Jonathan saw 2 figures, one big, one small, one small. Both were lying curled up on the white marble steps of the mansion. He blinked, disbelieving. Then his heart stopped. "Emma?" he shouted, tossing his leather briefcase aside, running as fast as he could. His feet slipped on the thin layer of ice, but he didn't care. He sprinted forward, and what he saw hit him like a storm. Emma was wrapped in a dirty blanket, bundled inside an oversized man's coat, and the person holding her was a thin, dark-skinned boy, maybe 13, dressed in rags, his lips purple, his body trembling violently. In that moment, a father's panic collided with another emotion: confusion. My God, what's happening here? Jonathan dropped to his knees, scooping his daughter into his arms. His hands were ice cold. Emma was still breathing, faint but steady. The boy barely moved. "Emma, sweetheart, can you hear me?" Dad, she whispered weakly, her voice trembling. He kept me warm. Jonathan looked up at the boy. Elijah's eyes opened slowly. Those deep brown eyes met Jonathan's, not pleading, not afraid, just tired and certain. His voice was cracked, broken. She's safe now. I kept her safe. Then he collapsed. Jonathan panicked, shaking him, desperate. Hey, no, 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 stay with me, kid. Can you hear me? No response, only a faint, fragile breath, thinner than thread. 10 minutes later, the sound of sirens tore through the still air. Paramedics rushed in, covering both children in thermal blankets. Jonathan stood there frozen, his mind storming with chaos and disbelief. When the ambulance doors closed, Emma was laid beside Elijah. Even unconscious, she reached out and held his hand. Jonathan watched that small gesture and felt something inside him shatter. A boy with no home, no shoes, no warm clothes, had nearly died just to save his daughter. And all through the night, he, her father, the man with everything, had known nothing. 3 hours later, at St. Mary's Hospital, Jonathan sat in the long corridor, hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. Before him on a small monitor, security footage from the mansion played on loop. Each frame cut into his heart like a knife. The boy appeared at 11:23 p.m. He looked through the gate and saw Emma crying. He climbed the tall iron fence, fell, got up, knocked, rang the bell, and called for help. No one came. Then he took off his thin jacket and wrapped it around the girl. She sat beside her, pulled the blanket over them, held her close, and said something the cameras couldn't record. Then he started to shiver. But he never let go. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3, 8 hours in total. He never moved. He never gave up. Jonathan covered his face. Tears broke free. Dear God, that boy. He saved my daughter. Detective Sarah Collins, standing nearby, spoke softly. Mr. Sinclair, if that boy hadn't been there, your daughter wouldn't have survived the night. But what moves me most is that he knew exactly how dangerous it was, and he still chose to stay. Jonathan nodded slowly. He looked up at the monitor, at Elijah trembling, wrapping the blanket tighter around the little girl, still managing a weak smile. That boy didn't just save my daughter, Jonathan whispered. He saved me. Sarah glanced at him. What do you mean? Jonathan let out a faint, broken smile. I have everything. Money, power, fame. But I forgot the one thing that matters most. How to be human. And that boy, he had nothing. Yet his heart was warmer in the coldest winter night than anyone I've ever known. Jonathan sat quietly by his bedside when Elijah finally woke up in the hospital. The boy opened his eyes, dazed, voice weak. Emma, the little girl. Is she okay? Jonathan smiled through tears that rolled down his cheeks. She's fine. She's alive. Because of you. Elijah nodded faintly, his lips trembling. I just didn't want her to die out there alone. Jonathan looked at him. Words caught in his throat. Under the sterile white light of the hospital room, he realized the child lying before him wasn't just the one who saved his daughter's life. He was a mirror, reflecting the part of himself Jonathan Sinclair had long forgotten. 3 days after that night of snow, the frost had melted. But inside Jonathan Sinclair's heart, a storm still raged. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy, Elijah Carter. A child with no blood ties to him, no family, no wealth, no home. And yet, he had given Jonathan's daughter something all the money in the world could never buy. Life. At the hospital, Elijah was fully awake now. He sat propped up against a pillow, his small hands still bandaged from frostbite. Jonathan entered, holding a cup of hot cocoa. Elijah smiled shyly. "You don't have to, sir. I'm used to cold water." Jonathan sat beside him, his expression soft. "Well, you no longer have to be used to the cold. No one should ever have to be." Silence filled the room. Only the steady beep-beep of the heart monitor broke it. After a moment, Jonathan spoke slowly. "Elijah, do you know you saved 2 people that night?" Elijah looked up, surprised. "2?" Jonathan nodded. "Yes. My daughter. And me. I used to think money could replace time, could heal anything. But when I saw you holding my little girl in that freezing night, I realized how much I'd lost." Elijah lowered his eyes, voice soft. "I just couldn't leave her there. Someone had to stay." Jonathan smiled, eyes glistening. "And you chose to stay. Now, it's my turn." But before Elijah could answer, the door opened. Detective Sarah Collins entered with 2 social workers beside her. Her gaze was kind, but her voice carried authority. "Elijah Carter, we need to talk to you." Elijah's hands tightened around the blanket. A flicker of fear crossed his face. "About what?" Sarah spoke gently. "You're listed as a missing minor. Your foster family, the McAllisters, filed a report 2 years ago." Jonathan froze. "Foster family? You mean the place he ran away from?" Sarah nodded. "Yes. Legally, they're still his guardians. We're required to return him to the system." Elijah's face went pale. He turned to Jonathan, voice trembling. "Please don't make me go back there. They weren't good people. They took the money meant for us. If we didn't clean fast enough, they'd hit us." Sarah's eyes softened. "Can you tell us more, Elijah?" Elijah shook his head. "I've told people before. Nobody believed me. They said the McAllisters were good, strict but kind. No one ever believes a kid with nowhere to go." Jonathan stood, his tone low but firm. "I believe you." The room went silent. He turned to Sarah, voice resolute. "This boy isn't going back there. Not while I'm alive." The next day, Jonathan did something he'd never done in his entire life. He hired 3 of the best attorneys in the state, not to protect his fortune, but to protect a boy he'd met only days ago. The media caught on quickly. The story of the homeless boy who saved a billionaire's daughter spread everywhere. People praised Elijah's courage, but the law was colder than public sympathy. A runaway foster child had to return to the system unless it could be proven that abuse had occurred. Jonathan knew he couldn't win this with money. He'd have to win it with truth. 3 days later, Fairfield County Family Court. The room was small, but the air was heavy with tension. On one side sat Jonathan, Elijah, and their attorneys. On the other hand, Mr. and Mrs. McAllister, dressed impeccably, their faces polished with false smiles, their private lawyer seated behind them. Judge Margaret Anderson, a silver-haired woman with sharp, calm eyes, reviewed the file before her. Then she looked at Elijah. Her tone softened. Elijah, I've read all the reports, but before I decide, I want to hear it from you. Tell me, son, what do you want? Elijah was quiet for several seconds, his hands clenched tightly. Then he took a breath, his voice trembling but steady. I don't want to run anymore. I just want a place to call home. A place where I'm not treated like a burden. Not hit because I missed a spot while cleaning. I just want to be somewhere someone actually sees me. The judge tilted her head slightly. And you believe Mr. Sinclair is that person? Elijah turned toward Jonathan, the man who had cried for him, sat by his hospital bed and believed him when no one else would. He nodded. Yes, because when I had nothing, he still saw me. The McAllister's lawyer objected, presenting polished photos and fake reports, smiling family portraits, glowing testimonials. But Jonathan's legal team had done their work. They brought forward former foster children who testified, kids who had been beaten, starved, and silenced. As they spoke, the truth finally broke through the courtroom walls. Judge Anderson read through the final statements, her eyes softening. Then she raised her gavel. Her voice was calm, but every word carried weight. Based on the evidence and testimonies presented, this court orders that Elijah Carter be removed from the custody of the McAllisters immediately. Temporary guardianship is hereby granted to Mr. Jonathan Sinclair, pending adoption proceedings. The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Then little Emma, seated in the front row, burst into tears. She ran forward and threw her arms around Elijah. Through her sobs, she whispered, "You're not leaving, right?" Elijah smiled, tears streaming down his cheeks. "No, I'm staying. I'm home." Jonathan rose, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said softly, voice thick with emotion, "Welcome home, Elijah." That day, headlines spread across every newspaper. Tech billionaire adopts homeless boy who saved his daughter. But for Jonathan, it wasn't a story about gratitude. It was a redemption story. He had once lived in a mansion filled with every luxury, yet devoid of warmth. And now, because of a boy who once had nothing, he had found his heart again. 6 months later, winter was long gone. The sky over Greenwich was clearer and bluer than it had been in years, as though the snow had never fallen. On the backyard lawn, beneath the wide oak tree, Emma and Elijah were building a fort out of blankets and chairs, laughing, loud and carefree, like any two ordinary children. Now healthy and radiant, Elijah was trying to stretch a blanket over a low branch. "Emma, pass me that wooden clip." She grinned widely. "Here, make it tight, okay? Our fort has to survive a storm." From a distance, Jonathan Sinclair approached, holding a tray of lemonade and cookies. He smiled at the two children, one born of his blood and one born of his heart, and saw no difference between them anymore. "Any room for your old man?" Emma turned, her eyes gleaming. "Always, Daddy." They all sat together inside the tiny fortress of blankets, branches, and dreams. No luxury, no noise, but it was a real home where three people had finally found themselves again. Elijah peered through a small opening in the blanket. Sunlight streamed through, falling softly on Emma's face. And Jonathan's. He said quietly, "Do you remember that night?" Emma paused, then nodded. "I do. I was so scared. I thought I'd never see Dad again." But then you came." He smiled. "I was scared too, but I thought that if I left, no one would stay." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you for staying." Jonathan looked at the two of them, his voice trembling. "That night, I thought I'd lost everything. But the truth is, I gained everything. I got my daughter back. I found a son I never knew I needed. And I got a second chance to be a better man." They laughed together. Real laughter. No tension. No loneliness. A golden light spread across the garden as the afternoon sun dipped low. Elijah sat by the window later that evening, gazing at the yard. He held an old photograph in his hand, the only one left of his mother, the two smiling brightly in a tiny room. Beside it lay a new photo, taken at the official adoption ceremony. Elijah, Emma, and Jonathan, 3 faces glowing with happiness. He whispered, "Mom, I did it. I kept my promise. I kept my heart warm, no matter how cold the world got. And you were right. Kindness, once given, always finds its way back." A gentle breeze drifted through the open window, as if in reply. 16 years later, a small classroom buzzed with laughter. On the blackboard, written in neat chalk, "Be kind anyway." A young teacher entered, Elijah Carter Sinclair, now 29. He smiled as he looked at the students in the front row. Bright, curious faces. And in a few, the quiet sadness he once saw in his own reflection. That day he told them the story of the longest night of my life. Not to be praised, but to teach one truth. Sometimes, kindness can't save the whole world, but it can save one person. And sometimes, one person is enough. When the bell rang, the class emptied quickly, except for one boy. Thin, shy, his clothes worn. He approached Elijah hesitantly. "Sir, I live in a foster home. They're not very kind. I don't know what to do." Elijah froze. Then he looked into the boy's eyes and saw himself, 16 years earlier. He knelt, smiled gently, and said softly, "Come see me after class tomorrow. We'll figure it out together. No one has to be alone anymore. No one has to be invisible. Okay?" The boy nodded, eyes glistening. When he left, Elijah turned toward the sunlit window. On his desk were still the same 2 photos, his mother and the family who had saved him. He spoke quietly, to the memory, to himself, to the world. "That night, I thought I was saving a little girl. But the truth is, she and her father saved me. Sometimes we stay to save someone, but in the end, they, the ones whose hands we hold in the dark, lead us back to the light." There are stories that remind us kindness still exists, that even in the coldest night, the human heart can still shine. This isn't just Elijah's story, or Emma's, or Jonathan's. It's ours. the story of those who, despite loss, choose to stay, love, and be human. If this story touched your heart, share it, so that kindness will never become rare in this world. You're watching Deep Life Tales, where true stories remind us who we are. We may not save the whole world, but if we save one person, we've already made it better. Because sometimes, the people we stay for are the very ones who save us from the dark.